Hey y'all, how are you doing? I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. It's me, Kim, and I'm back for another video. This is a little bit of an overdue video about what's currently happening right now. I feel like I'm in like middle school cosplay with, with this hairstyle, but I'm here and we're going to talk about it. This is a crazy time. I obviously have some thoughts. I wanted to, I don't really care about being first to a topic. I wanted to make sure that I did some reading so that I could really have a thoughtful and compelling conversation about this current political moment. If you are interested in what I have been reading to prepare for this conversation, that list is over on Patreon, patreon.com/FORHARRIET. The format of this is going to be, I have some notes. So the first part of this video is going to be kind of like a lecture style, and then I'll come back in and address the super chats, okay? Okay. So, the first thing that I want to do is acknowledge that we are here because of a cisgender heterosexual black man. And all of this would not happen for a black person of any other demographic. And this is not a competition. I absolutely believe that George Floyd was murdered. I believe that he should still be alive. I believe that the people who killed George Floyd, the man who killed George Floyd, and the officers who sat and watched him be murdered deserve harsh consequences. But you also know that I'm a prison abolitionist, so it's a little complicated. So, though it is not a competition and it's not a fight, I do think that we should keep in the forefront of our minds that we have decided in our communities that certain lives matter more and that is unacceptable. And I believe that every black life is valuable, that I am in this fight for every black person, woman, trans, non-binary. And if you are killed because of state violence, then I want us to show up for you. I personally believe that the relative silence around the murder of Breonna Taylor is reprehensible. Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade, they deserve our outrage. They deserve our support as well. I know that Louisville, Kentucky is like setting shit on fire and lighting it up for Breonna. Thank y'all so much for holding it down. I know that so many black women, black non-binary folks, black trans folks have really trying to make sure that Breonna Taylor's name is not forgotten when we're talking about this. So in case you are unfamiliar, Breonna Taylor on March 13th, police stormed into her house with a no-knock warrant, meaning they stormed into her home without saying who they were. Her boyfriend just saw people in her home and he fired a warning shot. In return, the police of Louisville, Kentucky shot her and killed her while she was in her bed. The police officers who were responsible for that killing are still on the force. There have been no consequences for her murder. Actually, I believe that her birthday would have been this Friday. So I think that we should just keep in mind that when we say Black Lives Matter, all Black Lives Matter. And we should also note that the officers stormed into Breonna Taylor's home looking for somebody who they'd already apprehended, right? So this is not just about police violence and police brutality. This is about police ineptitude. All right, so now that that's out of the way, I want to start by saying that I am not upset by looting and I'm not upset by riots. I'm upset by the circumstances that precipitate these kinds of uprisings. I know that now the new common narrative is that all of the violence that we're seeing, the property damage, the fires, the looting or whatever, is only Antifa or white people. I have seen ostensibly progressive black people say, oh, it's just white people causing trouble because they feel like that strengthens their moral claim. And I've also seen now a lot of conservatives push the Antifa narrative because it suits their agenda. Why are you doing that? This is ridiculous, number one, because that's categorically untrue. We know it is not just Antifa or white people or white supremacists who are doing the looting. We know that they are not the only person doing the graffiti or whatever. We have many, many black people on camera doing these things. So why are you trying to push a false narrative? But two, I hope that y'all see that blaming Antifa or outside agitators, which is a phrase literally lifted directly from segregationists during the civil rights era, that is a way to delegitimize varied expressions of rage. That rage is valid, it is useful, so there is no reason for us to try to play the respectability game and say that it's only white people trying to, no. And if you are black and out there setting police cars on fire and looting and tearing shit up, I'm with you. I support you. We don't have to try to be respectable in this fight. People are dying. What are y'all doing? It does not suit our interests, okay? So we are past that. We're past trying to neatly package our rage. I personally don't intend on getting into the streets for many reasons. Maybe we can get into that in another video. But I absolutely support the people who are in the streets. I absolutely support the people who are fucking shit up. I am not going to try to admonish you. I'm not going to try to say, oh no, like you're doing it the wrong way. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We are in a state of emergency right now. You do whatever needs to be done in the state of emergency. And I support y'all. Okay. So I think that the mistaken narrative that a lot of people who feel like we need to protest in a respectable way, who feel like we need to emphasize this idea of peaceful protest, they feel like we have to prove ourselves worthy of being listened to. But why? Why? It doesn't matter how you protest. The people who have the power to alleviate your suffering will always say that you did it wrong. So agreeing with the construction that peaceful protest is the only way to do it is not going to work for us. It is not going to save Black people's lives, okay? So I just want y'all to understand that being anywhere as a Black person is going to be painted as violence. You know, we get Amy Coopers coming up to us and trying to weaponize the police force and trying to get us to assassinate us just for existing. So trying to make this big point about how we are doing it the way Dr. King would have wanted. No. And again, I get it, but no, you're reacting to white supremacist ideas. If you're going to do something, do it because you think it's right and not because you're worried about some historical narrative about Black people being violent or excessively angry, because that narrative will always change. They will always change the narrative about who we are and what we do to suit their needs, okay? And something, if you're interested in how historical narratives are crafted and how they shift, I absolutely think that y'all should read a book called Stamped from the Beginning. It's by a man named Ibram Kendi. It is about the history of racist ideas in this country and their political usefulness. It's so, so good. So if we're talking about how narratives change to suit conservative ideas, let's first talk about Donald Trump. Okay. So yesterday, Donald Trump in his bullshit little press conference, he said that he is an ally of peaceful protesters after he has spent years vilifying Colin Kaepernick. It makes no sense. It is ideologically incongruent. But that yesterday, it was useful for him to say just minutes before having the police tear gas the protesters outside of that church that he's only been to one time. But in order to save face, he's going to say, this is America. Protest, your right to protest is enshrined in the Constitution. Just do it the right way. There is no right way for white supremacists. And I hope that at this point we understand that. You know, people right now are minding their business, walking down the street, and they're still getting their heads split open with rubber bullets. You know, members of the media. Have you seen how members of the media have been targeted? How these police forces have no shame. Okay, the media's right to cover these protests is supposedly enshrined in the Constitution, right? We have a constitutionally protected right to freedom of the press. But these fucking, okay, I'm not going to go too off on the cops because I don't want this to be demonetized. But the police intentionally target members of the media because they know that there are no consequences for their actions. We are way past trying to prove like that we're here for a purpose or that everything that we're doing is okay. So these Black Lives Matter protests are coming right after the Open the Economy protests. And I think that's really, really important because they look really different. So about, I don't know, 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, I saw during one of those Open Up the Economy protests, white protesters lynching in effigy some governor. I don't know whose governor it was, but literally a dummy, you know, like a scarecrow with the man's face on it, lynching him. I find that image to be exceptionally violent. In fact, when I was scrolling down Twitter and I had to hurry up and scroll past it because that, for me, is psychically harmful. But we don't call those people violent. Why don't we call those people violent? And I also have to say that this idea that people are we're trying to juxtapose what's happening now in the Black Lives Matter protests versus what happened with the Open the Economy protests. Those protesters are not better behaved or more legitimate than what we're seeing from Black folks and from supportive allies. Those people do exactly as much as they need to do to get their concerns heard. If they needed to loot and set shit on fire for their concerns to be heard, they would be doing that. But they don't have to do that because we see white grievance, white anger as valid. We have the fucking president of the United States saying, yes, liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan. You guys are doing it the right way. And that same president, after people are killed, say, we're going to get the militia to come. We're going to get the national, like, it is not the same. Therefore, we have no business trying to compare ourselves to what the white standard of behavior is. And this is my problem with progressives. We always let the most conservative people set the rules of engagement when we're trying to get radical outcomes. Okay? So we're trying to prove ourselves respectable and we're doing the right thing and Dr. King and what would George would have wanted. But we want some new shit. We want to completely destroy this shit and remake it over. We never make conservatives come to us. We always go to them. Why? What is the point of that? What do we think that we're really going to get out of it? That being said, I definitely saw videos of super privileged people who I know don't give a fuck about Black lives, like Jake Paul out there participating in the looting and all of that. Fuck them. Fuck them. They're opportunists. They're human pieces of garbage. It's ridiculous. And I definitely think it is useful and right to call them out. Okay. But ultimately, none of us should be angry at people in the streets doing what they do because all of this was preventable. Riots, rebellions, uprisings, whatever you want to call them, are never a community's first option. They're the last resort. We have knelt. We have written articles. We have begged and pleaded. We have had meetings with legislators. We have tried to reform police departments. We've tried to create mechanisms for accountability like body cameras. It's not working. The scolding and the begging is not working. And I also have to say that I'm really clear that a significant portion of the people who are showing up to these protests and rioting violently are, feeling hopeless, not just because of the senseless deaths of Black people because of state violence, but there are so many other reasons right now to feel like a hopeless person, to feel like you need to go to the streets and tear some shit up. Do I think that all of those Antifa people are deeply invested in Black liberation? No. 40 million people have filed for unemployment in this country while corporations get billions of dollars. Our federal government chose to give people a single $1,200 payment, and if you're lucky, you get some other form of state unemployment if you're unlucky. But I just saw something from a nonprofit called One Fair Wage, and they looked at the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and based on what they found, they say that less than 60% of state unemployment claims have been paid out. Yeah, people are gonna be desperate. People are gonna be rage-filled. They're gonna take to the street and set some shit on fire. But that could have been prevented. Those are choices. There is no point in scolding people for these actions. Seeing people wring their hands about violence is so silly. And I think it's really important for us to reframe this conversation, to reframe this debate, because we absolutely shouldn't see people acting violently and think of that as moral failure, right? This is not about the moral failure of individuals. This is about structural failure. This is about institutional failure on multiple levels. All right. We see that the state would rather terrorize and repress Black people than offer us the full benefits of citizenship. It's very clear that Black people are not full citizens in this country. Citizens are not executed on the street. Citizens should not have to surmount incredible obstacles in order to exercise their voting rights. Citizens should have access to quality healthcare and education. But offering Black folks those rights in this country undermines the American project. I think we have to be honest about the fact that often justice is a zero-sum game, meaning that if Black folks advance, then some other people are going to have to come down a couple of rungs, right? The problem is they don't want to lose. People in power don't want to lose anything. They don't want to give an inch, right? They don't even want to let us live. They don't want to let us be able to thrive in our communities because they're going to have to lose something. So that's why I'm so wary of Black Americans who talk that anti-immigrant shit. Y'all be getting on that anti-immigrant shit, that nationalistic shit, that jingoistic shit. And I'm like, y'all don't even really have citizenship well enough to be getting on the nationalistic bandwagon, Black folks. If you're a Black American and you talking all that anti-immigrant shit, you need to be worried about securing your full rights of citizenship before we try to focus on trying to strip that shit away from other people. I don't understand. And it's so what's great about this is it lays bare the lie and the fallacy of American exceptionalism. We are taught from a very young age. School basically is, if you go to public school is basically training you to believe in the myths of America, like American exceptionalism. And we see that shit laid bare. I guess it is exceptional that Americans in this country are taken to the streets because of police brutality. That Americans are finally, when's the last time we saw sustained protests for this many days? I've been intentionally trying to go back and do reading about the 60s and go back and do reading about 1919, the Red Summer. This is exceptional. And not only is it exceptional in this country, the sustained protest, but have you seen that people across the globe are protesting, setting shit on fire, fucking shit up in solidarity with Americans? That is so heartening for me. I am glad that we are at this point where people are saying enough is a fucking enough. Okay, so again, these are choices. We have decided, and by we, I mean the people in charge, our government has decided that we are okay with some people, disproportionately Black and brown people, living in a state of persistent misery. Political leaders have the opportunities to make different choices. The consensus is we're just not worth it, right? There just is not enough political will or political backbone for us to make different political choices. And so when you consistently neglect your responsibility for hundreds of years, you get police cars on fire. You get looting. Okay. It is the logical outcome, right? And do you ever even think, what are we even talking about when we talk about stealing some North Face jackets as violence, right? People are literally dead. And I've seen Black folks get on the internet crying about the Gucci store, crying about malls being looted. Y'all really gonna be out here crying about Lenox Mall? Are you serious right now? When people are literally marching for their lives? We have decided in these political calculations, and again, by we, I mean the people who have the power to alleviate your suffering. They have decided that the property owned by rich people has more rights than poor people, than Black people. When Trump tweeted, when they start looting, we start shooting, he was basically equating property rights, the rights of the moneyed, the rights of capitalists, to your right to live. So I think at this point we see that they have stolen everything from our people, homes, educations, the present and the future. The kind of looting that the government and private sector does, It takes so many forms. And it's also about where they choose to put resources. Isn't it so fascinating that the same government that for the past 3 months couldn't figure out a way to test and trace people so that we would not now have over 100,000 people be killed in this country, that in a matter of days they've been able to set up all of these many militia bases, all of these many army bases? I saw on Twitter where in Los Angeles, there was a section of Los Angeles, was it at the Staples Center? Where like there's a full on functional army base with tanks and soldiers lined up, like battalions. But 3 months ago, you said it was impossible for us to get a concerted federal effort to test people so that we don't have to die. What is the truth, America? I don't understand. So again, these are choices. I also wanted to talk about Atlanta. So I think it's really significant that Atlanta went up the way that it did. Atlanta is a city that has Black politicians, lots of very wealthy Black people, Black business owners. It has a thriving Black elite, and it still fails to protect its most vulnerable citizens. I was so kind of shocked and surprised to learn when I was doing the research for this little sit down that Atlanta has the worst income inequality in the US. 1 out of 4 people in Atlanta lives in poverty. And the thing about poverty, is those poverty levels are so low. The federal poverty guideline is $12,760 if you're single. It's $26,200 for a family of 4. So how many people are living just above the poverty line in Atlanta? So you mean Atlanta, y'all try to call this Wakanda and Black Utopia, and like 1 in 3 people is just barely making it? I think that the Black folks who got on that press conference with Keisha Lance Bottoms, T.I., Killer Mike, the rest of them should be really ashamed, because we can do so much better. I think, was it T.I. or was it Killer Mike who said Atlanta is all we have? Look, if Atlanta is all we have, then we don't have shit, you guys. If Black Utopia is a city where 1 in 3 people, between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 people is living in poverty, that's the best you can do? That's your revolutionary imagination? Absolutely not. And that's why I think it's really important for Black people not to ignore class. We love to cite all these Black revolutionaries and throw up the fist and all that. Those Black revolutionaries that you like to put on t-shirts and you like to quote on Instagram, they were anti-capitalist. That's not an accident. If you're trying to have a conversation about white supremacy that is divorced from anti-capitalism, you're wasting your time. And wealthy Black people, middle-class Black people, they love to ignore that part because the system works for them. I will say, as a middle-class Black person, I am not safe from racism at all. But Black people who have any kind of access to class privilege have to understand that in what Patricia Hill Collins would call the matrix of domination, or what bell hooks would call white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, there are settings, situations where we are much less vulnerable. And that can make us blind to what is actually happening to poor people, right? We have, in many cases, lots of structural privilege, and we have to be able to recognize that if we are really about that life, if we are really about those revolutionary impulses, then we can't just be okay with being able to weaponize these systems, with being able to profit individually off of these systems. Okay. I am honest about my privilege. I want to make note of it. And it is incumbent upon us who have, by accident of our birth, or who have been lucky enough to have access to resources that afford you any kind of mobility, to acknowledge how you are complicit instead of pointing fingers. Look, I'll be honest. I'm not the biggest Killer Mike fan. I'm definitely not the biggest T.I. fan. And I understand how pained they were. I understand how much Atlanta means to them. But, when you're up there talking about Atlanta is ours, clearly the people who are in the streets fucking shit up do not feel like Atlanta is theirs. We think that Black capitalism is going to save us. when black capitalism still requires the exploitation of workers. Black capitalism might be a softer, more gentler, more conscious form of exploitation, but it's still there. And I say this as somebody who has employees, right? I make it a point to say that I pay the people who work for me a fair wage. And I'm trying to work to create a work environment where I can offer full benefits, where you can have paid time off, right? It's still capitalism, and that is not revolutionary. The 2 or 3 people that I'm able to employ, that does not make a revolution, right? And I am not delusional about what I'm doing here. I'm simply trying to reform a system that cannot be reformed. And it ain't gonna be reformed by my little tiny business. Let's be honest about that, okay? So one of the reasons why I want to be so careful about how I use this platform and the things that I say is because I understand it is so popular for us to use black radicalism as an aesthetic. We want to dress up as sexy Black Panthers, and we want to wear Asada Taught Me shirts, and we want to say no justice, no peace, or justice or else, and we want to be, fake little revolutionaries. But what do y'all think revolution looks like? So it was so fascinating to me to see T.I. and Killer Mike up there, and I think Killer Mike was wearing a Kill Your Master shirt, and I'm like, that's what these people out there doing. What masters are you talking about, right? It doesn't matter if the masters are black. It don't make it better. Okay, so that's why I think it's really important for us to do the reading. And I also think it's important for us to be 100% clear in the words that we're using. I'm not out here talking all willy-nilly about revolution, because revolution is messy. Revolution looks like mass funerals. Revolution looks like people dying. Revolution looks like people losing their jobs. We still do not have communal systems in place in order to really supplement our communities if we're really talking about what a real revolution looks like. We see what happens to real revolutionaries. We read about them. They become symbols for us to just post about and, allude to, ironically. But real revolutionaries are imprisoned. They're killed. They're exiled. It's not cute and it's not fun. And I do not want to romanticize that one bit. If y'all are down for the cause, I'm down for you. I want to support you, but I don't want to die, and I don't want y'all to die. I don't want to bury people I love. I don't want entire cities to be destroyed like Black Wall Street. We talk a lot of shit, but are we really about it? So I recognize how important it is for me, being I'm an admitted scaredy cat. I don't want to die. I don't want to go to your funeral. I don't want your community to be burned down. But I will always use this platform to support people who are dedicated to doing the work. And as a person with a little bit of privilege in this capitalistic system, I am never going to use this platform to advocate for corporate interests. I'm never going to advocate for the political interests of the elite. That's what we saw Black folks doing in Atlanta. And they tried to dress it up as pro-Blackness. No, it is called being a sellout, you guys. And we can do better. We owe each other. Okay. So finally, I also think that we should consider what's going to happen, what the outcomes are, what the aims are. I have done a lot of historical reading over the past couple of days. And sometimes reading history is empowering. Sometimes it feels good to read history and know that, this has happened before or we've made it out. And I will say that the history that I've been reading over the past 4 or 5 days has been the opposite of that. When I have been reading about race riots, rebellions, and uprisings, the circumstances were often very similar. And unfortunately, the outcomes are just generally not good. And I want to be hopeful. I want to be able to say that I think that this is going to end in a positive way. I want to be able to say that I think that this is going to end the way that things ended in 1968, where after Martin Luther King was assassinated, the Fair Housing Act of 68 was passed and the Civil Rights Act of 68 was passed. I don't think that we're there. So while I support y'all fucking shit up in the streets, while I think that all of these riots, rebellions, uprisings are completely legitimate, I am not hopeful at this point in time. And I don't think that there is a reason to be hopeful. But I do think that there is a reason to continue doing the work. I think that there is reason to continue supporting each other via mutual aid, via giving to bail funds, via calling and texting and petitioning and spreading the word. But I think that we should be really, really honest about where we are in this political moment. And it's not looking good. I also think that if this moment has not radicalized you against the police, against the institution of policing, then it's not clicking. We see how police are violent, they are militaristic, they are demonic and malicious in the way that they use violence. This is not about keeping peace. This is not about protecting communities. This is about old school, racist, fascist law and order. And old school, racist, fascist law and order, which is the foundation of policing, is always going to be used to lock up Black people. It is always going to be used to vilify your very valid and legitimate rage. So I encourage y'all to do some more reading and thinking about why policing as an institution needs to be eradicated, why we need to completely divest from these systems, because it is never going to protect us. We are never going to be safe from the police. Doesn't matter if they're white, Black, whatever. They are not here for us. Finally, I just don't expect things to go back to normal. So we're in a new time. There was the before time and there's the after time, and we're currently in the after time. So I'm going to go back and address the super chats now. Let's see. Okay. Oh gosh, 2,000 people are here. Let's see, super chats. Not all cops are bad though. I don't really give a fuck if not all cops are bad. I don't care about not all cops being bad. All cops participate in a racist system, in a system that is structurally meant to cause destruction in our communities. So it doesn't matter to me if you're a good person who chooses to participate in evil. Doesn't matter to me. Okay. So next, first of all, thanks, Adrian. Let's see, Aiden. Aiden says, one of the criticisms of protest in general is that people get lost in specifics of a movement. Do you think there's space right now for imagining outcomes? Have you seen any related to this uprising? So I think that that's really a good point. I think a lot of criticisms of these current uprisings is we're not organized, we don't have aims. I think I actually agree with the idea that these protests are primarily cathartic. Yeah. Because I think it is interesting that it did take a couple of days, but the officer, Derek Chauvin, who actually killed George Floyd on video, he was apprehended. But this is not just about George Floyd and getting a very specific outcome. I think that this is about years and years and years, decades, centuries of pent-up rage. I think that this is about inaction, governmental inaction, to alleviate the suffering of people who don't have jobs, don't have shit else to do, don't have a lot of hope, who can't imagine for themselves a better future. So I think that one of the reasons why I don't imagine this ending positively is because I am not sure. I'm not sure what governmental action could be taken to alleviate the rage that has been boiling inside of people for so long. I'm not sure. Becca Slayer says, I love your channel and want to help in any way. Thank you. Kelly Evans says, thank you. Tina Marie says, as the granddaughter of a Black Wall Street survivor, I don't give a fuck about their building. I'll post the link to an interview he did after the live is over. What building? What building? So anyways, I think what Tina is trying to say is that historically, white folks, white supremacist governments have had no problem destroying black communities, black buildings, black businesses when it suits their political needs. They have had no problem looting us, right? Looting our culture, literally looting us, like literally stealing from us our financial futures. So why should we give a fuck about stealing some shoes? Well, I'm supposed to care about y'all stealing some shoes? Stealing some clothes from Old Navy? We're talking about generations of wealth that's been hoarded, stolen, plundered. I don't know. Wise Ass Gamer says, I wish I could give more. Anything that y'all give, I appreciate. Alex A says, it's time for global revolution. I do think that it is time for global revolution. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the most heartening things has been to see, I saw Black Lives Matter protests in Trafalgar Square in London. That's insane. Seeing Black Lives Matter protests in Brazil and France, like, I think as a Black American person, some of the feelings, it's easy as a Black American to feel resentful because our culture gets exported globally. The stuff that Black American folks make, it gets exported and it gets commodified and other people get rich off of it. And I also see sometimes people feel resentment that Black people, across the diaspora are using our stuff and indulging in our stuff. And it does make me feel good that, yes, our culture gets exported and we get extracted from it. We're removed from it. But it does make me feel good to see that kind of solidarity across the globe when it comes to the suffering and the pain of Black American communities. Yeah. So I definitely will keep that in mind the next time we are talking about, intra-diaspora cultural appropriation, right? Because if you're willing to show up for us, if you're willing to burn shit down in your community because we're suffering, that's the shit that I need. That's that shit I do like. Okay. Stephanie Lewis says, when white people have an uprising, it's a revolution. When we do it, we're criminals and violent. Yeah. So I think that, I listened to this podcast called Revolutions, right? And I learned so much about the French Revolution and I've learned so much about the Russian Revolution. And that stuff is celebrated in history books. Like the French Revolution. Okay, white folks love the French Revolution, okay? The American Revolution, that's, white folks still wearing tri-corner hats, right? Pretending that they're Benjamin Franklin because they love the American Revolution, right? But revolution, you only like revolution if it suits your political needs. The revolution that Black people are talking about is revolution that would fuck your shit up. It destabilizes your shit. And that's not the revolution that you like. Massey says, I can't see the comments. Okay. Sorry. Kim C says, your work is appreciated. Thank you, Kim. Aiden says, no such thing as peaceful protest when cops show up. Oh my God, Aiden, this is such a good and important point, right? Like, the thing about police is we do not have a police force that is invested in de-escalation. We have a police force that is emboldened to make shit worse, right? So even last night, these curfews that have been haphazardly implemented across the country, we see the police force, instead of letting people, giving people a warning and say, oh, by the way, it's curfew. Did you know that? You need to leave. Literally arresting people, assaulting people, accosting people as they're walking to their car. What is the point of that? The point of that is to inflict terror. Police officers, and this is going to be demonetized, so thank y'all for the donations, because we just going to be honest, right? The police officers across this country, they are terrorist groups. we see, another an article that I linked on the Patreon was an investigation from Reveal, and what Reveal did an investigation. They looked at the Facebook profiles of police officers, and they saw hundreds of police officers who are in these racist Facebook hate groups. I hate Muslims. Kill all N-words, right? Like, police, there are so many white supremacists embedded in police organizations across this country. Like, they have to, the federal government has had to say, oh, by the way, do y'all know that y'all have a white supremacy problem? So anyways, what I'm trying to say is I agree with you, Aiden. When the police show up, things are automatically going to get violent because they are not invested in protection. They are invested in inflicting terror. Okay. Matty says the rage is valid. I hope Americans continue it. I hope so too. Wow, so many donations. Thanks, guys. Andrew Walker says, I just wanted to say you look great and I love your opinions even when I disagree. Joe has to be called out for it. What does Joe have to be called out for? I'm not sure. But thank you. Themis and Thoughts says, because of your work and every other black woman, the black female body is finally being visible, and I think white women might be reacting to this. Interesting. I'd like to hear more about that. Tamika Prince says, imagine if society would stop putting women of color in boxes. Then we wouldn't have to resort to gimmicks to get seen and heard. It must be a strange concept to have an open mind. Oh, okay. I think more people have given. Oh gosh, a lot more people. Okay, Amber Limbaugh says, I know I can't fully understand, but I'll always listen and learn and stand with you. Thank you for all you do. I mean, so you know what? I was having this conversation with one of my friends yesterday, and the conversation that I was having with, I understand that for a lot of non-black people in this moment, they're speaking out and they're protesting or whatever is performative. But I choose to look at it on the bright side, right? Even if half the people who are doing this are just doing it to perform, and in a month or two they will forget about this and, go back to their white privileged lives, or their, relatively privileged lives, or their anti-black lives. If half of the people who post things on Instagram or speak up on Twitter, if half of y'all remain invested in this struggle, then that's a win. If a quarter of y'all who before this political moment, if y'all continue to remain invested in allyship and continue to remain invested in solidarity, that is a win. I don't want to deter people or discourage people or shit on people for showing up. Yeah, we probably could have used you before. Okay. Yeah, probably could have used you in the fight before. Okay. Black Lives Matter protests have been happening for 6 years. But if you're showing up now and you're genuinely invested in divesting from your privilege, if you are genuinely invested in sharing your resources, right, and giving money to people who need it, welcome. I'm not trying to look a gift horse in the mouth here. Okay. DCA says, America's lucky we want justice and not revenge. Egg fucking exactly. I'm like, for hundreds of years in this country, and that's the other thing about reading history. I read this book. It's about 1919. It's a book by Cameron McWhorter. It's about the Red Summer of 1919, where over 100 race riots and rebellions broke out across this country because of lynchings, because of state violence, because of police brutality. I mean, the fact that it's just looting, the fact that we're just talking about some police cars getting burned, some buildings being burned, like, black people are incredibly restrained. Incredibly restrained. The fact that y'all aren't out here, I'm not really gonna graphically detail violence because, I don't want to be on any lists. But the fact that we are not doing what has been done to us is enormous restraint. So shout out to y'all. for just stealing some North Face jackets. Okay. King John Targaryen I says, the level of naive liberals crying over looting. You're right on the point of American exceptionalism, but in Egypt, Syria, Libya, Chile, Brazil, almost all of Latin America, there was looting and rioting. It fucking happens. Yeah, I mean, it's a thing, right? It's a thing. Zeneb Mohammed says BLM protest in Norway on Friday too, and it's a huge one. That's amazing, right? And also, how many black people does Norway have, right? The fact that we are even seeing solidarity protests in places that don't have a lot of black folks, like y'all know where I live, in the state that I live, like, you know, it ain't that many black folks, right? Like, black people are obviously here and they're thriving black communities, but the BLM protests have been overwhelmingly white. And if we are talking about what separates this historical moment from others in the past, I think that the amount of white people who are getting involved and the amount of white people who are also invested in fucking shit up, right? Because people love to talk about the civil rights movement, but you know, a lot of those white liberals from the 60s loved King because they felt like King was palatable and King was nonviolent, right? He chose to use nonviolent direct action as his liberation strategy. That's easily palatable, right? It's easy to get behind somebody when they're saying, y'all don't kill, don't steal, like, let's show up in our church shoes. I think it is a little bit riskier to show up when, you know, you're setting shit on fire. And I gotta, you know, we don't want to give white folks too much credit for doing the right thing, but I have to say that is notable to me. Andrew Walker, the mistreatment of black people is being noticed internationally. The people bringing chaos to peaceful protests are at least being acknowledged. We have to act up every time they hurt us or treat us poorly. We must fight. I agree. You know, act up. You can get what? What did City Girl say? Okay, that was not appropriate. Sorry. Okay, Sarah M here. So much love and support from Tokyo. Thank you, Sarah. Brittany L says, Trump's photo shoot at the church just reinforces the fact that white men feel empowered to rewrite history even in real time. Exactly. Yeah. And before Trump came out and did his little press conference or whatever, I tweeted about the fact that I felt like maybe what was taking Donald Trump so long to address the nation was he was trying to reconcile the fact that so much of his base consists of racists. You know, like, racists love Donald Trump. And not to say that there's not racists in the Democratic Party. We all know, but the kind of overt racism that Donald Trump traffics in is what literally draws people to him. Let's be honest about that. But also, we see that we're 4 or 5 months out from the November election, and the Republican Party and Trump, they are deeply invested in trying to get black men on their team, right? I think that they really think that they have a good chance of getting 15 to 20% of the black male vote in November. The Republican Party does. And so I felt like, I don't know, I have no, but in my mind, it just seems like the political calculus of how are you going to appease the white racists while also trying not to completely alienate black men who have a very narrow kind of political consciousness. And that that press conference in front of that church, it really for me signaled Donald Trump saying, oh, fuck it, we're going all in on the racists. We're going all in on the white supremacist vote. So again, you know, if you're a black person who chooses to vote for Donald Trump in November, you're a fucking fool. But, you know, I'm not going to have no Joe Biden debates, but, you know, it is what it is. We have bad choices. Naima says, I appreciate your content, Kim. I've learned so much from your channel. Black people in the U.S. have been pawns in the U.S. imperialist game for too long. We feel your pain because you have all suffered at their hands globally. Thank you, Naima. April B says, thank you for the work you do. I'm not shocked that the black bourgeoisie want respectable protests. Black capitalism will not save us. I think it is so important, you guys, to understand that if you are a relatively a class privileged black person, that the relative privileges that we have in this system, they are so unstable. You know, it's like if one Jenga block gets pulled out, if one thread gets unraveled, then all of our shit gets unraveled. You know, I was born to professional parents. We don't have no generational wealth. We're hanging on to our middle class status by a fucking thread. We're treading water. And too many black people feel good about their ability to tread water. That's not a privilege, right? Just barely hanging on by a thread. If one person in my family gets sick, we ain't middle class no more. If I get sick, I'm not middle class anymore. Ain't no generational wealth. Ain't nobody to go to. So we need to be deeply invested in liberation struggle because we should not have to live these kinds of lives of precarity. We are vulnerable too. Okay. Wada says, thank you for taking the time. Okay. Adrian Driver says, I feel like we're just now ending the era of MLK. I think that the era of MLK has been unraveling for a few years. I think Black Lives Matter has, you know, the having a leader full movement instead of like one leader. I think that that has precipitated the end of the MLK kind of respectable protest era. So I think that we should also, if we're talking about giving Black women the credit that they deserve, giving Black queer women the credit that they deserve, we should also really appreciate them and celebrate them for helping to transform the way that we imagine protest and rebellion being, the way that we imagine this stuff actually happening on the ground. Obviously, the Black Lives Matter movement is not perfect. I have critiques, as we all should. But the kind of changes that we are seeing, the kind of transformations that we're seeing, I do think that we are moving in a positive, a more productive, we'll say, not positive. I don't know if it's positive, but I definitely think that we're moving in a more productive direction. King Ko says, love your channel. 68 DC riots also caused more gentrification in the city. What are your thoughts about that? Are riots more harmful than good? So this is what I mean. So do I think riots are more harmful than good? I'm not sure that it's a binary like that. I'm not sure. But I do think that riots are justified. And so the 68 protests, which happened in DC, but they happened like all across this country, they precipitated lots of legislative change. They precipitated lots of change in the composition of communities, Black neighborhoods. And I think it is really fair to say that the legislative change that ushered in, probably not the best, right? Like the Civil Rights Act of 68, the Fair Housing Act of 68, those were useful reforms, but they were not nearly the kind of change that we really needed, right? They're not the revolutionary or radical change that Black folks really needed. At that point, it literally was a Band-Aid to stop Black people from tearing shit up, you know? And so what we are seeing in 2020 is reacting to the failures of that really limited, marginal, incremental policy, you know? And the other thing about the legislative change, the societal change that happened after 68 was it gave white liberals and conservatives an excuse to say, we're done here. You know, like, you know, after that, so many traditionally white institutions, you know, started, you know, trying to recruit Black folks and, you know, have their little token Black folks and, you know, like in like Harvard and stuff and, you know, Ivies and whatever, just started to admit more Black people. And that allows white liberals, people who believe themselves to be progressive, to feel good about, we have our one black person, we have our few black people, that's enough activism for the day, like that, the meme that's popular, like, that's enough social justice. So, and I think that that's also why people have such deep critiques of incrementalism, is because it lets people off the hook, right? So I understand why people at this point are saying we just have to tear shit down. We just have to burn it all down, because we see what happens when we just say, well, that's all we can get, so let's be happy. Because do we want to be in the same place 50 years from now? I don't. I love my nieces. I don't want them to be doing this shit when they're in their 50s. Okay. Okay, let me refresh the page. Rocky says, thank you for all the content you create. Thank you, Ethan is hearts. Classical 421 says, thank you. How do you approach black folks and other POC who believe these aren't anti-racism protests, but see it as cops versus protesters? They're legit trying to rewrite history as it's happening. So here's the thing, and I think this might, for me, be an unpopular opinion, but as far as I'm concerned, an anti-cop protest is an anti-racist protest. So I understand that the precipitating event for these protests across the country is the extrajudicial killings of black people. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, this is really centered around the cisgender heterosexual black man. But as a person who knows better, in my mind, this is about the killing of black people. All Black Lives Matter. And I understand that there are people who are just coming to this protest because they hate cops. They're just coming to this protest because they're anti-capitalists. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that, right? Because if you're anti-cop, guess what? I'm anti-cop too. If you're anti-capitalist, guess what? I'm anti-capitalist too. Now, later on down the line, we're going to have an anti-racist conversation, okay? We have to have a conversation about racism in leftist movements. We have to have a conversation about racism in anti-capitalist movements. But right now, at this very moment, if you're out in the street linking arms and, throwing tear gas canisters back at the police, we on the same team. And one thing that I understand and that I know to be true is black folks are not going to be able to get this done on our own. We're just not. So I think that we need to be okay with the fact that maybe our interests are not always going to be 100% identical to the people who are out there with us. But if our interests converge, if they align at this moment, then come on, let's get it done. That's what I believe. Akila says, tell me why there are multiple videos of cops breaking into businesses. I don't know. Like I said, cops are not here to de-escalate situations. They're not here to make peace. They are here to get their violent Call of Duty fantasies off. That's what they want to do. Cameron Johnson says, universal health care. The U.S. is the only first world country in the world without universal health care. People are one medical bill away from bankruptcy. We are all, well, unless you're really, really rich, we are all one illness away from bankruptcy. And the fact that we don't have universal health care is also about racism, right? People don't want to expand our social safety net. They don't want to expand universal health care because they know that black people will benefit from it. And that's literally in the data, right? That's literally in the research. People do not support healthcare. They don't support Obamacare. They don't support expansion of the social safety net because they believe that too many black people will benefit. And because of these historical stereotypes and myths about Black people being lazy and undeserving, and because we are stereotyped as being scammers, they shoot themselves in the foot. There are lots of poor white people who need that shit, but they don't want us to have it. Okosua says, I'm late as fuck and your hair looks cute. Thank you so much. Jay Rodriguez says, a lot of Black protesters love dark skin but not light, and vice versa, or Black men that don't like Black women, something that should be addressed now too. Also, homophobia is still pretty big with Black men. I don't know a whole lot of people who love dark skin but don't love light skin. It usually goes the other way. But I definitely think that homophobia needs to be addressed. I think one of the reasons why we have not seen, and we probably won't for a long time, see a national uprising because of the mistreatment of a person who is not cisgender and heterosexual is because of homophobia. So, yeah. Waves Right says, I'm so tired of people using MLK in the argument. You know what? I'm okay with MLK being used in the argument. I think that MLK, his legacy and his words and what he actually stood for gets misrepresented. I mean, King had lots of very radical ideas. Yes, he did choose nonviolent direct action as his mode of protest, and people, that's too passive for a lot of people, but he was also very dedicated to anti-capitalism. He was also never afraid to call out white moderates, in ways that upset them. So I think that it's okay to cite Martin Luther King, but political education in this country is so poor that the only Martin Luther King that we know is Martin Luther King, who talks about holding hands and Black kids and white kids coming together. We don't have the Martin Luther King who preached Jeremiads. We never learned about the Martin Luther King who said all this shit is about to crumble. We don't ever really talk about the Martin Luther King who wrote Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos and Community, who said, look, I'm trying to help y'all, okay, but all this shit is about to go up in flames. Nobody wants to engage with that king. Nobody wants to engage with the radical king, because we sanitize these people, we strip them of their legacies, and that's also about anti-Blackness. We like Black people to be symbols. We don't want them to be able to live, their legacies to live on fully. Changeling says, thank you for streaming live. Thank you. D610 says, my majority Latinx community thought the cops here wouldn't hurt us because they look like us, or somehow our city is special. Wrong. Yeah, it's wrong. And I think a lot of white folks are saying, I've seen lots of really bloody images of white people being shot with rubber bullets, getting their head split open. I saw a photographer saying her eye was shattered by a rubber bullet, right? A lot of white people are experiencing the kind of violence, the kind of terror that Black people have been experiencing for hundreds of years. And I'm not happy about it, but I think it's useful. Lilac Moon says, BLM protests in Edinburgh, Scotland, Sunday. Chalk lines on the floor for COVID. I was too young to do that for Mike Brown, but now I can. Shout out to Edinburgh. Don Albert Mills says, I agree, Kimberly. This period will go down in history as the beginning of the investment of whites in this. We will march out, outlast the racists seeking to use the protest to ignite a race war. Yeah. Ugo says, it's important to note that the protests internationally aren't just about the Black Americans who are murdered. They're about the Black people internationally. Let's make sure not to erase those folks. Yep. I agree. Tori says, I think it's also important to highlight that these riots are done by a lot of kids, and it's justified because we grew up going to peaceful protests. Okay. Antonia says, Republicans claim they care about the Constitution. When POTUS says he's going to bring the military to BLM, it is crickets, hypocritical. Well, we all know. I mean, look at conservatives on the Supreme Court. We all know that conservatives only care about the Constitution. They only care about literalism when reading the Constitution when it suits their political interests. That's just a thing. We all know it. You know, it's like conservatives, right? Like, if you really believe in the Constitution, then you should be deeply invested in freedom of the press, right? Right? Like that is like amendment number 1. But so many conservatives have aligned with Trump in trying to make the media and the press the quote enemy of the people. The media is the people. It is of the people. Okay. Jazz is Black says, do you think Black people will give up infrastructure, meaning not spending money or getting benefits for total government reformation? I don't know what that means. Okay. The Mel Experience says, hey Kim, how do you feel about non-Black POCs gaslighting Black folks about the BS notion that we didn't show up for ICE protests? I've not heard that, but Black people show up for everything. Black people show up. We show up. You know, I am a Black feminist, and the Black Feminist Project, and something that I've really struggled with, frankly, sometimes, is coming to terms with how selfless, fundamentally, the Black Feminist Project is. The Black radical imagination sees beyond borders, right? It sees beyond race. And that often means that we gonna be out there marching for people, advocating for people who are not going to do the same for us. And I'll admit that I really struggle with that. It is very difficult for me. But I still, you know, after doing the reading and listening to these people and understanding where they're coming from, I understand that a commitment to justice and a commitment to liberation, and it's hard to say, but it does have to go beyond your immediate personal interests. And so if you are trying to criticize Black folks for not showing up to ICE, then you're just not paying attention. Because Black folks be out there. We be advocating, and y'all be anti-Black in your communities, and y'all be, you know, saying slurs in your communities, and we still show up. Okay. Oh my gosh, somebody gave me $50. Okay, Alexandria. With how white billionaires are becoming richer, is economic revolution, supporting small businesses, Black businesses, increasing wealth in the community not valid? So I think that I'm not saying that, so first of all, I don't think that supporting small businesses is economic revolution. I don't think that that's true. But I think that it is useful for us to support each other financially. But I hope that we are not confusing supporting each other financially, you know, supporting small businesses or whatever with the kind of economic revolution that will transform communities. We're just not going to be able to get there by buying, I don't know, t-shirts. Yeah. But I do think that if I have the choice between supporting, you know, if I have the choice between making Jeff Bezos richer or supporting a small business, I'm going to support the small business. Okay, Hey says, I love your work. Black folks in Europe support Black Americans because they experience the injustice in Negro too. Race issues are completely dismissed in countries like France, and racial statistics are prohibited. Racial statistics are prohibited in France. Yeah, oh, okay. Lauren asks, how do you feel about Blackout Tuesday? I don't get it. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't get Blackout Tuesday. Who came up with it? You know, it's like, I went to bed pretty late or early in the morning, and then I woke up really early, and then Blackout Tuesday was a thing. I'm not sure, and this might just be my own ignorance. I'm not sure what are we trying to do. I'm not sure what we're trying to do. I'm not sure. ZS says your videos resonate with me. Thank you. S. Dot says, hi Kim, this is Sarah, the other black woman from Oklahoma. I enjoy your work and just became a patron. Thank you, Sarah. The Walking Gauge says, I love this channel. Thank you. Marcus the Woo says, sorry if you talked about this earlier. How do you rectify teaching people and being anti-cancel culture and recognizing this justified anger? This is not an attack. I am curious. So I think that, Dr. Brittany Cooper said something that I think is so good and useful, that anger should not reside in the black body. That we should find ways to channel our anger. And sometimes the channeling of that anger is productive, right? Like productive by like white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And sometimes it looks like fucking shit up. Sometimes it looks like catharsis. But I think that my anti-cancel culture stance does not mean that I'm anti-accountability. I do have a hard time with violence. I'll be honest with it. I understand violence. I understand why you would have violent impulses in reaction to being terrorized. I personally have a hard time with it, but I get it. But I also think that if we are trying to remake society, if we are trying to create a world where accountability is the norm, where you cannot terrorize us and oppress us and have your literal knee on our necks with no consequences, that we cannot skip steps. And I think that the justified and righteous expression of anger is just a step along the way. So express your anger, be mad, tear shit up. But I also think we need to think about next steps, right? Like, we can't stay in the tear shit up phase forever, and we won't. We're not going to be in this phase in 6 months from now. We're probably not even going to be in it a week from now, to be honest. But after we get through the burn shit down phase, then we can get to the, so what's the new shit going to look like? How do we rebuild? What does reconciliation look like? I think my problem, and historically the problem has always been that we try to jump to reconciliation. We try to jump to putting a Band-Aid on that shit while trying to quell anger or delegitimize anger or gaslight people and say that they're imagining this shit. Nope. Those days are over. One day we might get to the reconciliation part, but for now, we gonna be in the anger part. And I do think that aligns with my being anti-cancel culture, and that I do think that aligns with me being willing to teach. I'm willing to teach, but you gonna hear this anger though, We can come back together, but you gonna see, you're gonna have to reckon. We have to have a reckoning. You're gonna have to reckon with what you've done, and then we can come back. Tatiana says, I become torn about the looting when it's done in black communities because then the grocery store is gone and those jobs are gone. So I think that this is a calculus that people in communities have to make. And I understand, we want to talk about outsiders coming in and doing whatever. But let's take in Atlanta, for example, right? When, it was black people tearing up their own communities. Right? What calculus are they making? Because certainly they understand that that's the only grocery store. They understand that this is Aunt Judy's hair salon or whatever. But if in their mind, that violence or that destruction is what has to happen for us to get to a new reality or a new world, I gotta respect it. And we have to be okay with saying, okay, so in the near term, that means some people are going to lose their jobs. In the near term, that means that unfortunately, some black businesses are going to be gone. But what do we want? And that's the other thing that I'm saying about revolution I don't know if this counts as a revolution, but I think people are certainly taking revolutionary action. Like, it's not pretty and it's not neat, and it's gonna force people to make some really hard choices that are not easy or palatable. But I just don't think that I am in a position to question or undermine or invalidate the calculus that people are making. And also, I saw somebody say on Twitter that, if you're in a black community and your black business gets burned down and people aren't trying to save it, why not, right? Are you known as a force for good in your community? I don't know. I think a lot of times black capitalists, black elites, black bourgeoisie think that, like, our presence is a present. And maybe that's just not enough. And I say our because, like I said, I recognize the ways that I have been complicit in these systems, Yeah. Okay, Omega Hagen says, police officers kneeling is also bullshit. Colin Kaepernick kneeled and lost his job. A police officer decided to kneel on George's neck and he's no longer here. Oh my God, the police officer's fucking kneeling. Get the fuck out of here. And if you are a black person encouraging police officers to kneel, you should be ashamed of your fucking self. You need to do, and this is why it's useful to do the reading. You haven't done the reading, okay? Because we don't need police officers kneeling for a couple minutes or saying that they're on our side for a couple of minutes and then returning to that same system that is rooted in violence, right? Like, if you are a police officer and you're really about that life, why are you a police officer? The police force cannot be reformed. Sorry. And we see over and over again how good cops end up being forced out, how good cops end up covering for the bad cops, how good cops end up lying to protect the bad cops. Like, I don't give a fuck about you kneeling. It does not help us. Okay, let me refresh again. Okay, have you heard there are piles of bricks being left in protest areas? Also that white people dressed in black spy clothes are coming and breaking things. I have heard that. I don't care. I understand why you care. I really do. I understand the argument that white folks going into black communities or going into these protests and throwing bricks and fucking shit up, that makes black folks more vulnerable. I guess my thinking is, but black folks in these communities are already exceptionally vulnerable. And I have to say, I have a real problem with black people, turning people into the police. Why? Cause at 9:30 you're turning the rioter or looter into the police, and at 10 o'clock they still gonna spray you with pepper spray. Like, at 9:30 you think that you're doing a good job and trying to get the looter off the street, but at 10:30 they're still gonna throw the tear gas canister at you. I don't understand helping cops in this moment. I don't get it. I don't understand. Waves Right says, I feel black people didn't buy for one day. It would make a very strong impact. We need to really promote boycotting businesses for at least one day. Yes. I don't know, actually. I'm not sure. I would need to see some data on that. I would need to see some data on what the actual economic impact would be and what, I don't know. Esme Kim says, what do you think of white people who join in on the violence? I heard they shouldn't because they will get black folks blamed. I think I already addressed that. Notebook says, do you believe that the economic crisis from the coronavirus, impending depression, fall of the middle class, rise of poverty will compound the rioting and protesting, a movement against police violence into a class issue? I think we're already seeing it be a class issue. Yeah, I think a lot of the white people, there are a lot of white people who are invested in Black liberation, as I've said, but I think a lot of the white people are showing up, to make this a protest about everything, And when I said earlier in my remarks about how this is preventable, I definitely think that the murder of George Floyd probably still would have precipitated or fomented some violent action. But the level of violence that we are seeing now is absolutely because of governmental inaction. This was absolutely preventable. So when we see Donald Trump giving a press conference talking about deploying the National Guard, when we see senators like Tom Cotton talking about law and order, I want to yell at them, y'all could have stopped this. Y'all could have stopped this. Do you think that all those white people would be out here if y'all had chosen to give more than one $1,200 check? If people weren't concerned about how they're going to pay their rent and feed their children, do you think that all those people would be out there? Because I don't think so. So it ain't us, right? That's on you. Reparations are due. I agree. Courtney says, it's infuriating to me that we will be forced to choose between the demonic bigot Trump and the casually racist architect of many of the crises we're in right now. I mean, that's America, Courtney. Will Black people do another bus strike? I don't know about that. King John Targaryen, Magneto was right. Xavier, respectability, BS is over. You're talking about things I don't even know what you're referencing. I assume that is some comic book shit. Callie says, can you speak to the value of online slacktivism argument in such a highly polarized society? Is it worth it to comment on problematic shit in our timelines, or best to just unfollow, unfriend? I think that this is interesting. So, sorry, I haven't had an allergy attack on here in a long time, but it's because I've been on here for an hour and 20 minutes. Okay. Whoa, it is allergies o'clock. Okay, so this is an interesting point because we do not get to this place where white folks are en masse denouncing white supremacy and that they are talking about amplifying Black voices when they are actively referencing Black feminist thought, when they are actively referencing Black radical thoughts and liberation theology. We don't get here without slacktivism. We don't get here without social media. And so all of the people who have for years said that, tweeting doesn't mean anything, that posting doesn't mean anything, you're wrong. You're wrong. Because we don't see people in the streets the way that they are without social media. So the technological brilliance and innovation of Black communities, of Black organizers, got us here, in part. Now, obviously, community organizers and people on the ground, we need to thank them and thank them for putting their bodies on the line. But intellectual, ideological shifts, that's important too. And I also think that a part of going back and forth with people is also about public shaming. I think the public shaming that people are doing on the internet works. People don't want to be called out. And even if this blackout stuff or whatever, the Black Lives Matter stuff, even if that is performative, that helps my cause. So if your performance, right, helps to get the word out about something that I'm deeply invested in, if your performance helps to save lives, keep performing. I don't give a fuck. If you're only posting that Black Lives Matter because it's the trendy thing to do, or because you don't want to feel, you don't want your white friends or your Black friends to call you out, that's fine, right? I don't really care about what your incentives are. I care about what the outcomes are. But you asked if it's useful. I think it is useful to go back and forth to an extent. To an extent. Um, John Targaryen says, I'm seeing white liberals not understanding the reality. I have been doing this for a long time. I'm seeing white liberals not understanding the reality that liberalism has a political philosophy has run its course in providing a better society. Ideology that said we need to get rid of the aristocracy is not the new one. Okay, yes, I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think we're seeing an end to the old way. You know, it's like I had a conversation with somebody who is a political scientist who said to me, like, they can't say this in public, but privately, they say that the polarization that we are seeing right now in America is really a great thing if you are deeply invested in radical social change. So I know that moderates and liberals hate, oh, we're so polarized and things are so bad and we're yelling at each other in the streets. But that actually creates an incredible environment, a very productive environment for us to have to achieve some of the political goals that the left has been fighting for a long time. Because people are mad, they're angry, they're fed up. And now that we don't have to try to pretend to be civil, right? Now that civility is off the table, we're past that. That's canceled. Now we can really get down to brass tacks, you know, and fuck some shit up. So yeah. Um, Brianna says, it's crazy to me how many non black people will only see the looting and will dismiss the reason why people are protesting as if materialistic loss is more important than a person's life. It is not crazy to me, but I understand what you mean. I mean, fundamentally, like built into the foundations of America, the material possessions of a small moneyed elite have always meant more than the lives of black people, have always meant more than the lives of people who literally used to be considered property, right? What we're seeing is simply an extension of that same founding ideology. So it's definitely sad, but not surprising. Raven J says, I go door to door and sign people up for supplemental pharmacy care, mostly in middle class areas. A large reason people sign up is that they understand how precarious their financial situation is. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Let me refresh once again. Okay, I have to stop soon because I can't breathe. Um, is this right? This is saying that you guys have given over $1,000? This is saying that you've given $1,000 during this live. Oh my god. That is crazy to me. Oh my gosh, I cannot even believe that. Okay. Wow. Okay, let me get my shit together. This is a class protest. The guillotines are built. Yeah. So I think it is useful and important for us to understand the ways that class and race intersect. So, yes, it is in many ways a class protest. But if we think about like caste, black people in this country have been forced to occupy the lowest well, okay, I shouldn't say that because there's also Native American people. But in many instances, black people and Native people have been forced to occupy the lowest rungs of society, the lowest caste, intentionally. And we should also think about the fact that, yes, you know, we can criticize the black bourgeoisie, we can criticize black elites, black business owners, black politicians, but in these structurally racist institutions like policing, like healthcare, like education, it don't matter how much money you have, you will still be discriminated against, right? So an educated middle class black woman is still going to be discriminated against when she's in the hospital having a baby, right? If Serena Williams, right, can have her concerns be minimized, if Serena Williams can almost die giving birth, then what does that mean for the poorest black folks in this country? So that's why socialists, leftists, y'all got to do your racial reading as well, right? Because racial capitalism is a thing, and it affects black people of all socioeconomic strata in very specific ways. I just keep looking at that number like there's no way that that is a K. There's no way that $1,300 has been given. That's crazy. Okay. Black Phoenix says, if the black masses really want a revolution, we must be anti-capitalism. Capitalism is all about exploitation. I don't trust black capitalists. I agree. And here's another book recommendation, Racial Capitalism by a man named Cedric Robinson. Black people need to understand that we can occupy some momentary gains in the system of capitalism. We can achieve some marginal gains, or maybe even humongous gains if you're a Jay-Z, or, you know, if you're a LeBron James or whatever. But this system was still created in a way that sees us as the capital, right? Right? So we're never going to be able to find liberation in a system that requires black bodies to be the capital. It's incongruent. It's just not going to work. You know, and now, you know, the old slavery system, now we see us being herded into the prison industrial complex, and we're the capital there now. You know, it's a continuum. Jamie says, keep up the great work, you're amazing. Also, have you seen the footage of the police officers trapping the protesters in the commons and then attacking them? They ain't even pretending not to brutalize protesters. I have seen that, and that is why over here it is fuck 12. I have seen that. Ramanzilla says, the facts don't care about your feelings. People are the most obnoxious, intellectually dishonest people who don't even have a basic grasp of what statistics are and are not, and what facts are and are not. Okay, I agree with that. Okay, Nikki says, protest organizers in Austin, Texas last Sunday canceled 45 minutes before they believed non-black people would make it more about them and turn it violent. Many showed up anyways. Organizers were criticized. Many called them cowards. What do you think of their decision? I think that I understand the impulse that would make you want to cancel a protest because you felt like white people were going to make it violent. I understand, but violence is not our problem. I'm sure that y'all saw the clip of Tamika Mallory going around on Instagram where she says, we learned violence from you. Violence is not your problem when you've been terrorized, right? Like violence in response to violence is self-defense. And I just don't think that that should really be a primary concern. I don't know if I'm going to call people cowards, but I'm just not, I don't know. Let me find a tissue so that I can. Okay. Let me refresh one more time. I really don't want to hear folks like Umar Johnson and Tariq Nasheed. Girl, me neither. I don't. Melody says, I may be late, but as things are getting burnt down, how do you think we should all start imagining a future without these systems? I don't know. What is my answer to this question? I think the first step is not mourning things and not mourning property. I think that we are all We are all taught and socialized to view the destruction of private property as the worst thing that you can do, as the most hurtful thing, as the most violent thing. And I think that being really comfortable with the destruction of private property, of emphasizing the fact that public goods and a public commons are what is necessary for thriving communities, not private property. I think that's a first step. But beyond that, I'm not sure. Danielle Luther says, my husband and I love your commentary. We are also Patreon members. I love how thorough you are before speaking on any matter of importance. Thank you, Danielle. Okay. C Video says, thank you for this discussion, and I'm looking forward to listening to the interview with Derica Purnell and Charlie Carruthers. Oh, that's another thing. So, as I've mentioned earlier in the evening, approximately 90 minutes ago, I am still anti-prison, and that means that we have to really reckon with how do we punish or hold people accountable when they kill Black people? How do we punish the Amy Coopers? How do we hold killer cops like Derek Chauvin accountable? And so I wanted to have a conversation with radical Black feminists who I love and trust about what that looks like and how we can reconcile our anger and our desire for vengeance with an understanding that that kind of punitive punishment does not necessarily get us to where we need to go. So on Thursday, I'm having that conversation. Initially, it's going to be open to the patrons, and then I'll edit it and it will be posted here. You know, what does justice look like? Because I'll be honest with you. I've had a lot of conversations like this with my abolitionist friends, and sometimes I'm like, I don't know. I don't want Derek Chauvin to be free. And I understand that that is hypocritical. I understand, right? It goes against my Black feminist sensibilities to say, I don't want him to be walking the streets. I don't want him to be free. So how do we make sense of that? I also don't want the cops who killed Breonna Taylor to be free. I don't want the cops who killed Tony McDade to be free. But I don't want to further invest in the prison system. I don't want to legitimize it. And the other thing about this, and the thing that is so hard and tricky is, look, let's say on the off chance that Derek Chauvin is convicted. Let's say on the off chance that the police officers who killed Breonna Taylor are arrested and they're convicted. It's probably not going to happen. It happens almost never. But let's say it happens. Then we have further legitimized the prison system. Then that allows white liberals and conservatives to say, look, you got what you wanted. This is justice, isn't it? And to continue the system of ushering people, primarily Black people and brown people, into that system, right? So what they do is give us these little small symbolic wins, and that allows the further perpetuation of that system. That's what concerns me as an abolitionist, as a prison abolitionist, is they give us these little carrots, they throw us bones, and then we get thousands more people, hundreds of thousands more people whose lives are torn apart by the system because it's been further legitimized. It's hard, you guys. It's really hard. Bella Corp says, it'd be better if the performers protested too, though. I agree. Locke says, okay. Lumberjack says, I watched a video of yours the other day and found out that you are from Oklahoma. I am from Oklahoma. The Little Blurred Maid says, I personally believe neighborhoods would be better off developing inner community systems to prevent crime. What do you imagine could replace cops? Kind of that, right? Like community accountability systems, right? Where it's people in the community who are invested in restorative justice, who are completely divested from the prison system, coming together, people who actually have relationships to the people in the community, um, trying to find accountability in a different way. But I will say that I am not a thought leader on prison abolition. If you are interested in this, you need to be reading Angela Davis. You need to be reading Ruthie Gilmore. I just read a book called The End of Policing. I'm sorry, my nose is stuffed up. It's called The End of Policing by Alex Vitale. It's a really good book. There are lots of people who have been working through these systems and working through alternatives for a long time. Okay, we'll do one more because I'm suffering at this point. I'm a Patreon member and grad school student. Do you have any reading suggestions on social justice reform? If you're a Patreon member, then I just posted. Have you looked at the Patreon today? Because I just posted a list of things, like of books that have informed my thinking over the past week about this. So I would say start there. Um, Elise says, I have so many thoughts about everything happening. My question is, how do we deal with the problem of conservatism and how it seeks to preserve social power hierarchies? Okay, so here's the thing. Here's the thing. I understand why people say that we have to divest from electoral politics. I get it. The shit is corrupt, it's bullshit, whatever. But electoral politics is how conservatives are currently conserving power. That is currently how they are consolidating power. And if we allow them to continue to dominate electoral politics unchecked, we are in for some shit. Like generations worth of shit. I'm not talking decades, you guys. I'm saying 30, 40, 50 years of shit. If we cede the electoral realm to conservatism, if we say that we are not going to push back against voter ID laws, if we say that we're not going to vote, then we have said that we're going to allow the conservative movement and conservative activism and conservative politics to dominate our legislature, to dominate our legislation. And that has devastating consequences. So voting is not the end all be all. I object when, Barack Obama or Joe Biden or whatever, when they talk about just go vote. Everything would be better if we just went out and voted. No, that's not true, Barack, because you remember the protests when you were in office, right? But voting does matter. And anybody who is trying to say that voting does not matter at all levels, not just at the presidential level, you're not paying attention. It does matter. Okay. Okay. I think the best move, this is Raven. Raven says, I think the best move is to push away from prison and move to mental reform, actually helping people on a mental level. I assume you mean mental health care. 99% of people don't belong in a prison type system. I don't know if I would say 99.9, but I would say that the overwhelming majority of the issues that we are using prison to solve can be solved with a robust social safety net. They could be resolved with access to mental health care. They could be resolved by investing in under-resourced communities. Now, I'm not going to say 99%, but I would say a solid 90%. Sure. All right. You guys, I'll check one more time. All right, that's it. I've answered all of your questions. It has been 104 minutes. Thank you guys so much. This video ain't gonna have no ads on it. I already know. Ain't gonna be no ads. But I appreciate you enormously. I can't speak because my nose is clogged. Thank you so much for your generosity. I also want to encourage you. You know what I'll say? I made a lot of money on this broadcast. I will commit to donating right off the bat $150 to, we'll do the bail fund in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm going to check to see if that bail fund needs money, and I will go ahead and donate to them. I encourage you, if you have any extra money, if you have any, time to make calls, to send emails, to send tweets, to spread the word, if you are going to hit the streets, social distance if you can, wear a mask if you can. But I do think that this is a time for us to pool all of our resources and to do what we can. I appreciate y'all. I think that that's all I have to say. Bye. Talk to you later.